So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Next Tech Stories episode. Today, I have a real tax world celebrity, Porus Kaka. Namaste.
Namaste.
Porus is former president of IFA globally, International Fiscal Association, now honorary president, and the first IFA president from Asia in its history, which is almost 85 years old. Porus is a senior advocate in India and a barrister in England and Wales. As of December of 2022, Porus is also a president of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal Bar Association in Mumbai. So we will talk definitely about what does it mean. Porus is also trustee at IBFD, International Bureau of Fiscal Documentation. Porus got his LL.M from Harvard Law School, and it seems like your specialization is transfer pricing litigation and direct and international tax. I saw that in Chambers and Partners, you are ranked consistently as one of India's leading senior tax advocates, and it even said that you are international face of Indian tax practice. And the International Tax Review said that you are one of India's leading tax counsels. Considering how many tax specialists are in India, I think these are amazing facts. Porus, welcome to the show. And did I miss anything important about your CV so far?
No, thank you. You've been very generous.
Thank you. To be honest, it came to me that I should invite you on the podcast after I saw you leading one of the sessions at IFA Global Conference in Berlin last year. You had such kindness in your eyes and some great sense of humor. Where's this sense of humor coming from?
Well, I've always believed that tax is such a heavy subject, and no matter who your audience is, whether it consists of senior tax officials or practitioners or judges, I think to get through an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, without there being some break and light humor, I think then it just the whole session loses interest, and many people tune off and probably look into their phones and start working on their phones or on their calls. So I think just to remind the audience that this is not something where they fall asleep. It's important. The challenge now is when you try to be humorous and in an extremely polarized world, you have to be extremely careful about your jokes. And I think now the challenge is that you can literally joke about yourself and nobody else.
That's right. That's right. It's getting crazy. Um, can I ask, what was your childhood like, and how did you later decide to study tax?
So I think I was very fortunate. My father was a senior advocate in the tax profession. And though it was never said or anyone asked me, I think I was one of the few people who never needed a career guidance course. I knew in the 5th grade or the 6th grade that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I think it was just because of being exposed to what I saw that I sort of got enamored by it. The greatest difficulty was when I actually graduated from law school and I realized how vast the field of law was. That's when I needed some guidance as to what areas. But a few unfortunate incidents at that time. My father passed away before I got my final degree. And so the path that he set for me was in the international tax or into the tax field. And I sort of just followed that path. Though at that time, probably I was more enamored by constitutional law and the glamorous tort law and other stuff, and not necessarily tax law, which was rather probably more boring if you described it. But at that point in time, I chose the path which was probably set more than the path that maybe I would have done myself.
Mm. All right. And then what made you choose this path to the taxation?
And I was, I think, very fortunate that the senior that I worked on was extremely probably the most leading individual in India in the international tax field. And when I came back from law school in the United States, that was 1991, 92, this was the year when India opened up to the world. So simultaneously, as I began my practice, we opened up to the world completely as an economy, and therefore we had a huge amount of inflow or interest between the foreign corporations, investors, etc. So I think the timing worked out just perfectly as I began my career.
Mm. As IFA president, I believe you have traveled pretty much everywhere. Which places in the world are the closest to your heart?
Oh, I have, I think I have been fortunate to, I think I made it also an endeavor. It was not easy to, during the IFA presidency, I literally had to put my other professional career on hold because I took great interest in the presidency. When I took charge of IFA, it was a very Eurocentric organization. And I think one of my greatest endeavors was to widen the reach of IFA, whether it was in the Asia Pacific region or in South America. And I believe that if you are going to encourage the regions, you need to be close to them. And when you mean close to them is you have to be, we didn't have that much of Zoom and all that in those days. This was pre-COVID. And I
Mm.
think to be there personally as a president gave a tremendous boost, especially to the Asian region and also more importantly to the Latin American region. And I am fortunate to say that I have friends from Argentina to the Dominican Republic to Malaysia to Australia to Japan and of course Europe and America. And I think I was very fortunate to be welcomed so warmly by all the regions. And one of the things, especially for the non-English speaking countries that I visited, was I would make an endeavor to be able to speak in their local language and speak not as a person with an English diction. So I would actually go to someone who could speak Spanish, Portuguese, and not only learn what I have to say, but try and speak it with the pronunciation and the diction that they would be used to. So it was a tremendous effort, but I think the branches significantly appreciated the effort of me being there and being there to be able to speak to them in their own language. I probably couldn't do it more than 5 minutes, but I did make that effort.
Mm. So I can teach you some Latvian.
Yes,
Actually, Latvian is coming from ancient Sanskrit.
I see.
So it's a
Well, I
very
would have, I would have definitely, wherever I went, I did try to speak at least in that local diction. And of course, I think more importantly, be there, see how the branch is working, see what Central IFA. So I didn't want it to be some distant organization based in Rotterdam, but someone that reached out and was there for the branches throughout the world. And I think I was very fortunate that this was just before COVID that I retired.
mm. When I was at IFA in Mumbai, I saw in that in such a business city as Mumbai, I saw a mom with a couple of kids sleeping overnight on pedestrian walk next to my hotel, and other people said that they actually may be quite happy about their life. How can it be? And where do you find your inner peace and happiness?
I can't, I mean, I'm not sure whether I would agree with the statement that they would be happy with their life. I'm sure probably the answer is if they could find a better place, they would be. I think all of us have the opportunity to do good. What I have chosen really is, and I think I find the best time that I spend is with rescues, and I think this is in the context of animals. So I have been associated since I came back and before also from the United States with certain charities in Mumbai, which prevent the killing and of stray animals. And the time that I spend with them now, of course, the time may not be that much, but I give them my time pro bono and all that. But I think the time that I have spent in these shelters, the time that I've been able to do is perhaps some of the most satisfying parts of my life. So I think the greatest time, and of course, in my house, I have since childhood been with rescue animals always, and we've had a variety of animals from birds to parrots to cats to dogs and even a squirrel. So we've had a huge variety who've lived and lived hopefully happily in my house. But I think there's an opportunity for all of us to do well. And again, as I said, whether it's with humans or animals, I think it's their choice.
Mm, great initiative. I also wanted to ask about social networks that I saw that you are not on LinkedIn and just a little bit on Twitter. What are your relations to social media?
Uh, I think I find Twitter as a good source of information, but coming from, again, as I said, I look at two things. One is the world is a bit polarized today, and secondly, I think I am careful, especially after I assume the role of the IFA presidency, because IFA being a neutral organization, I learned very quickly that you can upset many people with what you say and what you don't say. So I think that caution continues in my social sphere. I haven't joined LinkedIn. The only reason being I am relatively short of time, and I just find that the amount of networks, I'm not even on Instagram. The amount of networks that I am on, which is really WhatsApp, Twitter, and Facebook, already takes sufficient amount of my time. So that's the only reason I don't want to add to more on the social media. But I think um, I'm extremely careful of what I say on social media for many reasons. And I think one of them was the role that I played as a leader of a neutral organization.
Mhm, mhm. How easy or difficult it was to lead IFA? What do you see about the tax professionals community around the world? For example, is there a correlation between success of a country and development of the tax profession?
Uh, well, if you look at, I think if you would say the larger developed countries, ultimately, whether it's in the economic sphere, whether it's in the political sphere, or it is the tax sphere, have a greater say. I mean, that's just a reflection of the economic power. And I think the change that we are seeing is the shifting dynamics of the economic reality, which is bringing in countries which are probably not earlier tax powers, whether it's a China or it's in India. Or so therefore, as the economy of the world changes, their power equation and their ability to negotiate it changes. So I think it's a greater reflection of the economic power, which then gets reflected in their ability to have a voice in the tax arena. So if you see that, that's the shifting dynamics that I see. And again, as I said, this is pure and simple economic reality.
Mhm. Okay. Um,
And just so you mentioned how easy or difficult was it to lead IFA? I
mhm.
think I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful team from my chair of the scientific committee, Steph Van Wiegel, who's an extremely close friend to the secretaries that I worked with, both Hans and Jean Blaise from Netherlands and Switzerland. And the best part of, we were more or less idem on all. There was only one, I think, in the entire 4 or 5 years that I was in the executive board, I think there was only one issue where we had a significant disagreement. But again, we worked through that, respecting our agreements. And I think at the end of the day, we were able to respect each other's principles. And most importantly, I think as a committee, or at least as we ensured that there would be no conflict of interest at any point in time, and we were able to ensure that as we led as a team without any conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Great. Uh, Let me ask you a couple of questions about your CV. This senior advocate and trustee of IBFD, what does it mean in simple terms?
Well, IBFD, very simply, as you know, it's a sister organization of IFA. It's the largest global tax publisher in the world, and it's based out of Netherlands in Amsterdam. So the structure of IBFD is it's run as by an executive board, but the overall advisory role is of the board of trustees, who give guidance to the executive board, etc., etc. So it's more fortunate. I think after IFA, I was not willing to take any executive role in any organization, and I have turned down several. But the IBFD was unique. It was more of an advisory role as a trustee. I did not have to be involved on a day-to-day basis, but I was involved as a trustee level. So I took that up. A senior advocate is really a similar term that you have from what we got from the British, like what used to be Queen's Counsel and now is King's Counsel. So it's a designation that's given to those who have achieved a certain seniority in the profession. And in India, it is given by the judges. So the judges of that particular court decide who is worthy of being elevated as a senior counsel. And it's on an amusing or a lighter note, it's a slightly elevated in the sense that we technically are not allowed to sign anything. So we are supposed to be really sort of in a fiduciary role with the court. So the court can rely upon us that when we say something, we do believe it to be true and it to be correct. Of course, we are strong advocates, and we will litigate fiercely for our client. But when we say something, it would be something that the court can rely on, in the sense that we are not tied hand and foot to the client.
Mm, it's very interesting. We will talk about the Indian judicial system later on, but before that, I also wanted to ask about your new position as the president of this Income Tax Appellate Tribunal Bar Association Mumbai. What this new post will be? What will be your responsibilities there?
Well, I hope it's going to be a very quiet and peaceful post. So I think the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal is the oldest tribunal in India. It's called the mother of tribunals, and it was set up way in more than 70, 80 years ago now. And fortunately, it still maintained its independence from the executive. And I think the role of the bar is to ensure that the tribunal remains independent, hopefully with integrity also. And to that extent, we are sort of a pillar of the institution to do our best to ensure that the tribunal remains the best tribunal that is there in India, and also keeps its independence. And I think keeping its independence is good not only for the judiciary, but also for a country like India, because many investors, India does not have a system where we can settle tax disputes at a lower level. So all disputes tend to go through the judiciary. And therefore, to have an independent judiciary is a huge asset that people or the investing community can rely upon in India. And there are statistics which say that at the tribunal level, anything between 66 to 75% of the judgments are in favor of the taxpayers.
So the taxpayers have a possibility not to go through the traditional judiciary system, but through the tribunal.
No, the tribunal is a part of the traditional appellate system. It is the second appellate level before you get to the High Court and Supreme Court. But
All
it is a
right.
part of the system, yes. But it's a separate tribunal,
Okay.
independent of the executive or of the revenue department.
Mm-hmm. But then do you have some conflict of interest to be in the tribunal and as an advocate?
I'm purely an advocate. Even as the president of a bar association, I'm president of the Advocates Bar Association. So there's no conflict of interest, but in the sense that the bar will be a pillar that the institution can rely on in case there is some issues of interference or otherwise. And of course, there are many other issues. I mean, the bar is primarily looking after its own members. So there are issues of, administrative issues, other issues. So it's also that. But I think I think it's a pillar for the institution to rely upon should there be a need.
Right. And tell us more about your tax practice at the chambers of Porus Kaka. How big is the team you work with? And I understand it's more like a sole practitioner, not a law firm, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The way the chambers works in India is that you have a senior person who leads the chambers, and then you have junior advocates or interns who work within the chamber. But those who work within the chamber are completely independent of me in the sense of in the sense that they are neither my employees or any of them, but they would be sort of, as I deviled in my senior chamber, they would be deviling in my chambers, and there would be an assistance or a financial. I mean, this is something which I've done differently when during their initial years, but eventually what they would do is after a certain amount of years, and that's what happened recently, they would move out on their own and establish their own practice. That is the juniors.
Mm-hmm.
It's slightly different from the UK bar in the sense that there we have a combination of seniors who create a chamber, whereas in India, a chamber normally consists of only an individual.
And this title of barrister in England and Wales does mean you also practice there? Or
Yes,
it's just...
so I used the COVID period to, I did exams after 30 years, and it's not something I would recommend. It was it was a tremendously difficult experience actually to start restudying civil law and criminal law and areas and actually get into sort of being basic advocacy and stuff like that. But I finished that process during the COVID period, and I did the other requirements, and I got my license to practice in England. So I do go there from time to time, but still the majority of my career is India based, and I think that's going to remain so. The litigation is significantly in India.
Right. And with all those credentials we heard, what would be your advice how to develop a great tax litigation practice like yours?
So I think for a barrister, I think wherever you are, or a litigator, I'm unfortunately going to say that there are no shortcuts. A tremendous amount of seniority will come from experience. And I think the few things that I would guide juniors to do is, I mean, as I said, there is no shortcuts either to the hard work, but most importantly, I think at all points in time, the juniors, especially when you're dealing with courts, when you're dealing with judges, you must remember that it is extremely important that they have faith in what you are arguing. Therefore, your integrity and the trust of the court within you is one of the most important things that will carry you further. So I think if you try to play fast and loose, you may win one or two cases, but you will certainly be the loser in the long run. Because if the judges start losing their trust in you and doubting what you say, you're not going to have an extremely good career.
Right. It's
And
all
some
about.
other things is, I think, when you mentioned, for example, the language issue, or again, depending on the language of the court that you are appearing in, and it has said it could vary from country to country, but I think to be able to have a good diction in wherever you are appearing, in whatever your language is extremely useful. And I learned this from my father, who, no matter how senior he was, would spend probably half an hour at least a week reading aloud in English, exceptional diction like Churchill or something like that, to my mother, who had better diction than him. And and I continued that tradition. And I found that when you read exceptionally good literature in your language and you read it aloud to someone who has better diction than you will be amazed how your diction improves in a very short time. But again, this has to be done for a consistent period of a year or two. But it significantly will assist you, especially when you're dealing with courts that depend on oral arguments.
Hmm. I was reading aloud Indian fairy tales to my kids, but not Churchill yet. so, but that's a good idea. Maybe they get asleep quicker.
Well, I would strongly recommend Churchill's war books. I think they are not only fascinating for the diction, but you are reliving the entire, and at least for people like based in Europe, you probably be able to identify it, but you're reliving each experience one at a time of the Second World War. And you go through the depths and you go through the heights also in those books.
Great advice. Um, I also saw some really big names among your clients in tax litigation, like ESPN, JP Morgan, Maersk, Siemens, FedEx, McKinsey. Uh, Tell us about your most challenging or interesting tax case you have had.
So I think literally when I came back from Harvard, and I think within maybe a few years after that, I had a unique opportunity to be an international expert in an arbitration in London. And it was involving a large public sector undertaking in India, which had been directed to pay out a huge debt. And it was fascinating because we felt at that time, and maybe we felt correctly, that there was some connection between the public sector undertaking and the Indian revenue, who were trying to do everything to prevent that debt being paid, creating withholding demands. So while the arbitration was going on in London, we had the suspicion that the revenue was sitting in the next room with the public sector. And it was such a, I mean, this was absolutely live litigation where it was timing of when the order came, when the English courts would enforce it, and would it ever get paid? And that was an amazing. But otherwise, tax litigation, I mean, it's great. I've had some of my finest cases where I've literally started from scratch. If you look at the Sanofi case or many of the names that you've already mentioned, you literally start out. And in India, we had the advantage of transfer pricing. When transfer pricing came in 2002 into India, no one knew what it was. We had very little literature, so it was literally being thrown into the swimming pool and you had to swim. And today, when you see the amount of judgments that there are, we have, and I think the credit for this has to go to all the sections, including the revenue, who have raised some, of course, some rather aggressive demands, but some unique angles to transfer pricing. The judiciary, who has excelled itself because we really started out, and of course to the bar. So transfer pricing is a unique area where literally India started out, and today we have a case, and sometimes on a lighter point, you may have a case which answers yes and no on both on the same issue, but we have a tremendous depth of judicial material on it. If you want a light case, I was arguing again in my junior days before a very strict member of the tribunal, and the issue was of the fact that a particular wedding had been completed and there had been no expenditure shown. So the suspicion is that if you had or you've got married and you've not incurred any expenditure on your wedding, then obviously you funded it from undisclosed sources or in cash or whatever it is. And therefore, they would make a notional addition of what they thought you would have expended in outside the books. So finally, when we reached the tribunal, we were able to show the judges that no, we had found evidence and invoices that the wife had spent on a hotel and on a five-star hotel and all. And the surprise from the court that I got was they thought this was wholly sexist, wholly chauvinistic. And they said, but Mr. Kaka, how can a lady alone spend the entire expenditure? Because I was arguing for the husband. And I had to reply, I said, Your Honors, I am not either supporting the system nor arguing in favor of the custom, but I'm only arguing a tax case that here are the invoices. They said nothing doing, and I lost the matter. Not on the fact that we were able to prove that the expenditure was there, but because this was a wholly sexist custom. So these are, I mean, few and far between amusing
Wow.
cases that I came across.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how also the culture impacts uh, the tax judgments and this is quite interesting story. Uh, at TIFA Mumbai, I heard somebody saying that in India it takes about 15 years to litigate a tax case. Is it still so? And if yes, why does it take so long?
Unfortunately, is so, and I think the problem is really today the tax tribunal has done so. You get up to the second appellate level within maybe 2 to 3 years, given your strategy, but then there is a blockage from the tribunal to the High Court. There is a huge backlog in some of the major high courts of the country, including the Bombay High Court, including Chennai, including in Delhi is a little bit better than that. So some of the major high courts have huge amount of pendency. And I think it's just the fact that we've not had sufficient judges to look at them. And that's the problem. Then the next level from the High Court to Supreme Court, again, there is a delay. So I'm afraid this delay continues to exist, and it's to a certain extent unfortunate. But for most clients, I think they concentrate to get to the tribunal level and to see that they are getting a good and a fair tribunal order, which is the first priority.
Mm. Any business principles or books or business gurus that have helped you to get where you are and that you could recommend to our listeners?
So again, I've already mentioned Churchill. I think I enjoyed reading that. One of the I was very fortunate about maybe 4 years ago to meet the Dalai Lama in person.
Mm.
And it was such, I have been staying in a particular hotel in Delhi for many years, and I know that he used to stay there also. But I tried to meet him on many occasions, but it just didn't work out. Finally, I found out the night before he was staying, and again I requested it. They said he was not able to meet me, but they said the next morning, perhaps he would meet me. And this was the first time I think I got up at 5 a.m. By 7 a.m. I was in my suit. I was ready in case he met me. And he actually came and spent some time with me. And I cannot say how wonderful it was and what an aura that person has, because it was one of those days where I was literally just happy, happy, happy the whole day. It was, and he spoke about my religion, he spoke about my customs, and I still have lovely photographs of that meeting. So I think I was very, very fortunate to be able to meet this kind of a person individually. As far as reading, I used to be a voracious social reader before I entered the legal profession. I've read everything from, and I've read authors. So that means every single book. I've read Agatha Christie, I've read James Herriot, I've read Robert Ludlum. But now I do no social reading. I think we have so much reading that we have to do on a daily basis that if I have to do or to unwind, I will do anything from Netflix to, but I won't pick up a book.
Sure, sure. But from this meeting with Dalai Lama, do you said he spoke about your religion and culture. Do you remember some thoughts that still make you smile or feel happy?
Yes, so actually we have a so we Zoroastrians, we worship fire. And in most of our fire temples, we do burn fire. And and His Holiness was of the view that perhaps now it's not environmentally friendly to continue that tradition. And not only that, he sort of he had some unique ways he sort of put his arm around me, and I've asked many of the Tibetan friends that I have, a few of them, as to some of the gestures that he made, and I'm still confused whether they were a blessing or they were, but it was a unique meeting, and I think I consider myself very fortunate to have met the person.
Right. Any other tax-related story that comes to your mind? Like, is there taxation in India still somehow related to castes?
Related to caste?
Yeah.
No, no, there's nothing. I think today, when I look at, suppose we were to look at India, you are well aware of the Vodafone saga in India, the retrospective amendment. So I have a tangential take on that, in the sense that everyone thought that was, terrible and it was wrong, etc., etc. I believe in a tangential way that was good for India, only in the sense that there was a belief, and I think that belief sometimes goes through all countries. Sometimes there's a belief that, we are so powerful, and I think there are very few countries who can have this belief genuinely, that we can do anything and upset the entire world community. And then there's a realization process that no, we are a part of the world community, and I think no matter how we exercise our sovereignty, there are certain limits to that sovereignty. And I do believe that it probably was a costly, but it was a growing up lesson for the country. And I think to this extent, today we are wiser in our experience, in our experience for that. So I think it was a difficult lesson, but it was, as I said, a lesson that I would say that we grew up from, and perhaps therefore the current disposition of the current government have taken a view that no, we will now not do anything which is retrospective in that sense. The second issue that I would look at is sovereignty. There's a huge issue on sovereignty in the global tax world. Whether you look at it from the point of the developing countries and arbitration, which they are reluctant to get into, or you look at the US Congress, and especially the Republican side of the US Congress, and when you look at some of the discussions on Pillar 1, etc., etc. And I do feel that sovereignty sometimes is used to really justify what political steps that you wish to take or do. And most countries have given up sovereignty. Every time you sign a tax treaty, you give up sovereignty. There's no doubt about that. So when you are willing to sign or willing to enter into tax treaties or global tax commitments, you are giving up sovereignty. So then this is something which is used perhaps when you wish to not negotiate or stay away from something that you dislike. So I do feel that that issue of sovereignty is there. And on the current tax developments, now just to step back, in 2015, I was fortunate to give the David Tillinghast lecture at the NYU. My good friend David Rosenblum had invited me, and it took me a year and a half of work on that, and I tried to find out the meaning of the word source. And when you look at the word source, which is a huge global dispute today, I mean, today Pillar 1 is all about source, whether market countries should have the jurisdiction and whether market should itself be a source. So again, I think when you look at some of the tax disputes there are in the world, business understands where they fall. But I think the political definition is still to be negotiated. So if you just look at Pillar 1, we are changing our concept of source. And again, I say, when I say changing, I'm not meaning it in a disparaging term. The reason is I do feel that there must be a credit given to the market countries, considering the amount of sales that are happening, and more importantly, considering that business today does not need a permanent establishment to be able to operate in that country. You can operate completely online, and therefore the old treaty principles of permanent establishments have not changed, whereas business has changed completely. So I can understand that shift. But where will it take us, and how far is really something which will be negotiated at the political sphere. And we will have to see how it goes. Strangely, I don't see much discussion going on Pillar 1 in the global community. A lot is happening on Pillar 2. And for the developing world, I think the Pillar 1 is, especially for the market countries and the larger countries, is important.
Mhm. And India has its own digital service tax. Do you suggest for the other countries what to do now while negotiations are on Pillar 1? Do they have to implement the digital service tax so to have more cards when they sit at the table of negotiations?
So I think if you are interested in Pillar 1 and you are interested in it happening, I think you need to keep the cards that you can negotiate with. And one of the cards is undoubtedly digital service taxes, whether you agree with it or not. Um, the only thing that I have reservations is most countries have put this DST as sort of outside the tax treaty. It's still an income tax, but it's outside the tax treaty. It's non-creditable. It's non-creditable within the treaty, or it's non-creditable within domestic law. And the fear that I have is, if Pillar 1 does not happen and DSTs proliferate, then rapidly we will get from where we don't want to be, which is the world of double non-taxation, to clearly the world of double taxation without credit.
Mm.
And I think that's a very scary place, because when you have taxes outside the treaty, which you cannot get credit for, and these taxes are at the gross level, few countries start, even if it's like 5%, 6%, 2%, if 10 or 15 countries start putting this on your gross revenues and you can't get credit, you will rapidly be in a state of double taxation in a very short way for business. And that, I think, is a fear. So I think there must be an effort to do not reach that world, no matter how much the revenue does not like the world of double non-tax. And I remember when I started out my career, I had this fascinating argument with someone who I highly respect in the tax world, Professor Hugh Alt in Vienna. And I was just a junior. This was in 2004 in the Vienna Congress in Vienna, the IFA Congress. And at that point in time, I was proud to say that there's nothing wrong with double non-taxation, and it's just a matter of negotiation and stuff like that. And Hugh had a slightly different view, and of course, he was kind to a junior, to far more to him. But today the world has changed, and I think there are concerns both in the public, both in the global community, and I think in larger sections of the tax-paying individuals that when individuals pay a certain amount of tax, others like corporates cannot get away with double non-taxation because of the power that they have. So there is a legitimate fear. Only concern is please do not end up in a world of double taxation, which was really the objective of international tax treaty law and negotiations.
Mhm. You mentioned Vodafone case, one of the famous ones coming from India, and I saw in one of the articles you said that one can find in India's judicial orders perhaps at least one judgment on every troublesome issue under the sun. Um, India seems to be quite advanced in tax theory thought development. Um how so, and how do you see this real huge development happening in India?
So the only cause for this, as I said earlier, is we do not have a system of settling disputes at the lower level. So every single issue that is raised by a revenue official will get settled by the judicial process. Fortunately, we have a relatively completely and a relatively independent judiciary, and I think that's the asset that India has to protect. But because of this system, every single thing filters through the judiciary. And therefore, people have made quotations that today 75% of the reported judgments of the world, be there on international tax or on transfer pricing, come out of India. And I
Wow.
think that, yeah, these are the statistics that we are looking at. And even when I speak to the learned judges from India, I think the caution that we give them is the fact that it's not only the Indians that will be reading your cases, especially on international taxes, the global community. But I must give credit to our judiciary that they have acquitted themselves very fairly. And when you look just at the judgment of the Supreme Court in Vodafone, this was a huge issue. This was a political issue. And yet the Supreme Court had the courage to decide completely in favor of a large multinational. And I think that's whether you like the judgment, you dislike the judgment, you agree with it, you don't agree with it, but you have to give credit to the fact that the judiciary can be completely independent, which is an asset that we need to hold on to.
Mhm. And in one other article, you mentioned that looking back at 20 years of litigation since the transfer pricing came to India, mm, uh, this reveals that the commentaries in the OECD transfer pricing guidelines become more subjective and more favorable to the revenue. Do you think this can be effectively used in the courts to discredit the OECD transfer pricing guidelines?
Well, not to discredit, but to use it to. So again, if you will see the guidelines as from 2017 onwards changing from 15, 17, even if you just look at the discussion on risk. So now the commentary seems to indicate that you don't only look at the form or the contract, but you look at where the actual risk lies between the two parties. Now, where are you going to find that? Because suppose I say that I'm completely insulating you from risk and the contract says so, and we will give you a cost plus markup, and no matter what are the risks, you will still always get that markup. But now the commentary seems to indicate moving away from the objective test to a more subjective test of substance over form. To find that is going to be hugely litigious. And therefore, my concern is that as you do water down some of the subjective, objective parts of transfer pricing regulations, you are certainly going to increase the litigation that is there, because then the fallback or the commentary that you rely on as a practitioner is too vague or too or lacks clarity, and it can have two meanings. And when you always say that it should be always substance over form, no one's saying no to that. But when you say that you can ignore or at least put contracts aside and look at the substance behind the contract, you're going into an area which is going to be impossible for the tax practitioner, for the client, and also for the judges.
Mm. And continuing on transfer pricing, how do you see its relation to Pillar 2? Now it's quite clear it's coming. And will the Pillar 2 basically at some point put transfer pricing into the trash bin?
I don't think I don't think I have an answer for that, because I think everyone's trying to find and see where they end up. But right now, it seems to be a unique combination of some formulary apportionment plus the arm's length principle as yet. As to when they completely disregard the arm's length principle, I have no answer for right now. But uh, all I can say is that it's hugely complex. And I mean, I really hope that they have an effective settlement procedure or a dispute resolution mechanism set up, because otherwise, if you're going to leave it to the domestic courts of all the various countries, you're going to have a nightmare for tax practitioners. I mean, for the clients and the taxpayers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's gonna be fun for tax lawyers, that's for sure. But
I would tell any tax lawyer, don't worry about your future.
actually, in the previous podcast, we discussed the artificial intelligence advancements, and I started to read the book the guest suggested, and it's amazing how this artificial intelligence is developing. And I even got scared at some point about what my kids will do in their career. But 2023 has just started. So how do you see the distant or not so distant future in tax systems developing? What's your prediction?
So the way I look at it, and I've seen this for the last 20 years, because we have these LPOs in India, which are legal processing, like the BPO, which is the business processing outsourcing unit. We have the LPOs, which have been working. So basic contracts been outsourced for years and being done by non-lawyers, being done by machines, being done by non-practicing persons, and being sent back. So I think there's a huge risk that the day-to-day routine functions will be done in the future by computers as opposed to interns or junior advocates, and I think that's a concern. But I do feel that there are professions like doctors, like lawyers, wherein the ability to, at least at a senior level, the ability to imbibe what a judgment says and to put it across will require a human element that the computer will not be able to give. Because today, two of us could read a judgment and take out two different things from it. And the ability to take that out and put it in, because it's not that the same judgment means X, Y, Z to all 100 people, which it would to a computer. And therefore, I think wherever you bring in the human element, there the experience will come in. And to that extent, I think the senior parts of the profession will be immune to it. But I can certainly see that for basic drafting, basic stuff, there is a huge risk that artificial intelligence will somehow affect the at least the basic parts of our profession. So yes, there is a concern, but I mean, what can you do? You can't stop it. This is a process that you have no control over, and therefore you just have to be one step ahead of the machines. I'm not, I hope
Right.
I'm not sounding like the Terminator.
Not yet, definitely. Uh, and at the end of our discussion, on a lighter note, I found some tax-related stories from India as well for you, there are actually quite many of them in the book Rebellion, Rascals and Revenue by Joe Slemrod and Michael Keane. We had a nice chat at some tax stories episode as well, and in their book, they say that in 19th century, peasants in India were taxed for wearing jewelry and growing mustache, and in another story, the book also says that women of some low castes at that time in 19th century were taxed for covering their breasts while going outside their homes. And later, woman called Nangeli cut her breasts in protest to the tax and died because of the bleeding. And she was cremated, and her husband jumped into the fire as well. And the next day, the tax was abolished. Um, but I saw some fierce discussions on LinkedIn about this story. Do you think that was true?
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I've read and I've heard about these crazy stories. I mean, there's been crazy stories about taxes. In England, there used to be a tax on windows. So therefore, you see many of the old English places which never had windows, they had only walls. So you have these crazy systems of tax. But I think we are not we haven't given up crazy as far as tax goes. I mean, just look at pillar one and pillar two. I mean, when you
Yeah.
see the complications that are going to come, and then you must remember today we have pillar one, pillar two, we have the MLI, and then you have the basic tax treaty below all of this. So you have a structure of four treaties sitting on one of the one on top of it. And believe me, it may not be as crazy as what you mentioned, but it's hugely complicated. So we haven't given up crazy as yet.
Right, right. And there was an interesting episode also about the Empire of Great Mughals, which was between 1526 and 1709. And they had some interesting taxes like uh, jizya. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, that tax imposed on non-Muslims as means to convert them to Islam, and zakat, tax for Muslims, the tax revenues of which should be spent on charitable purposes. Do you still have some strange taxes left in India?
No, I don't think we have any of those. We have those. I mean, we have lots of unusual things, but we don't have any of them. The only equivalent I can see is that now, under the Indian corporate law, there's a compulsory requirement of the companies that are covered to spend 2% of their income on corporate social responsibility. And that
Hmm.
requirement can be anything. There are guidelines. It can be environment. It can be, but it's basically on social requirements, and that's a requirement that they have to spend every single year. So 2% of their revenue has to go on what they call CSR. And therefore, if you are an organization that is in environment or is in charity or is supplement of the poor and all, this is a valuable resource that you can rely on. And again, this is, I think, is probably a positive development. The only thing is that sometimes people say that you can't force us to do something. You must leave it to be voluntary. But again, we can have that debate separately.
Right. Well, Porus, it's been a great pleasure of talking to you, and this 1 hour somehow disappeared in a couple of minutes, at least in my time judgment. But at the end, of course, there's always the same question to all my guests: what is your version of meaning of life? What would you say to that?
Oh my goodness. You asked tax lawyers this question and you got an answer.
Some interesting ones.
So I think I don't know. I think you're probably asking what do I enjoy? So again, I've given you the fact of spending time with the rescues. I do enjoy traveling. I do enjoy eating well. I enjoy a good wine. So I I don't think I have found the meaning of life probably to give you this answer, but I think to go home satisfied in the evening at the end of the day and probably have a smile on your face is more than what we can probably ask for.
Great reply. Porus, wonderful talking to you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate that, and hope to meet you in IFA Cancun and have a joint glass of wine.
Thank you, Janice. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Good luck. Look forward to
Yes.
seeing you in Cancun. Bye-bye.